Good morning and good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are joining us from in the world. We are so excited that you all are here to join us. We have a group of people here in the room with us, and then we have a bunch of people in our virtual land, in our virtual world, right? How awesome is it that we have gotten to the point where we can be in a room together and be reaching dozens, hundreds of others in the virtual world, getting the same quality content and enjoying learning like this. I think that's pretty great, right? Well, let me take a moment to welcome everyone who is joining us virtually and joining us online. I am so happy that each of you are joining us. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. Just let us all know where you're logging in from. Maybe even share with us what it is you do in your community, in your schools, in your buildings. Let us know. Today, we have an expert in literacy who's going to share some amazing things about decoding in our students in 3 through 5 and making learning available, literacy learning available for all learners. And that's exciting to us. We do have a few housekeeping items that I want to share with you as we begin. So this presentation is going to be recorded, and you'll be able to receive that within the next couple of hours, 24, 48 hours after the event. If you have questions, please add your questions to the Q&A section. If you have other comments that you want to say as our presenters are presenting today, to just encourage them, hype them up, say a great job, go ahead, you can put that in the comments. But if you have a very specific question that you want us to be aware of, be sure to put those in the Q&A so that we can call them out, and we will have some time at the end of our presentation to answer those questions. And of course, we are all educators, we're all wonderful, but please be respectful in the chat, that we can all enjoy this learning experience. For those of you who are here with us in the building, we also are going to have an opportunity for you to ask questions. So make sure that you keep your questions handy, write them down so that we can all make sure that we have some great time together. My name is Terry King Hunt. I am the Impact Manager with Just Right Reader. Just Right Reader is a company whose mission is to make reading fun for students to learn and read with engaging decodables that are representative of the students in America's schools. And we want to make sure that all of our students enjoy reading. Is that all right? I think that's pretty good, right? So I am not going to take up any more of your time because we have some amazing individuals who are going to be joining us and sharing with us. Our first presenter is Dr. Susan Stevens. She is the Director of Early Intervention and Elementary Academics with Greenville County Schools. She is partnering with us to bring this whole event to you all today, and I'm going to turn it over to her and let her share.
I think I'm good, right? I think I'm good. Thank you, Terry, for that introduction, and thank you specifically to our Just Right Reader team for partnering with us for this opportunity. And as you said, we are really so fortunate to be able to share space to learn with each other and from each other today. I'm excited to be joined by my team from Greenville County Schools. For those of you who are joining virtually, let me just say you are missing out. If you have not put Greenville on your travel destination, you really need to do that. We are an amazing place to live and work. Our school district is progressive and innovative, and any opportunity that we get to share about the great things that are happening in our classrooms and in our schools, we certainly jump at the chance to do so. So as Terry mentioned, my name is Susan Stevens. I'm the Director of Early Intervention and Elementary Academics for Greenville County Schools. And today we're going to talk a little bit about our journey through this evolution in literacy instruction. And we're going to kind of spend just a few minutes talking a little bit specifically about Greenville County and as we have been able to make some significant shifts. So I have facetiously titled my slides Lit Venture, which as word people, this is of course a nonsensical word that we certainly in our internal conversations at the district, we sometimes joke about this, but when we break it apart, of course, we have venture, and by definition, the word venture means like a challenge or an opportunity. And then, of course, at the beginning, we have the word lit, which for those of us in this context, of course, we certainly focus on that standing for literacy. On a personal level, the word lit means something a little different to me. Our youngest son is 15. He is a freshman in high school. And for those of you who have experience with teenagers, you know they have their own vernacular, they have their own subculture. And so if you are a parent of a teenager, you know that the word lit means awesome. Yep, right? So in this case, for us specifically, when we say lit venture, we mean awesome opportunity or awesome challenge. And in Greenville, that is exactly what we are in the middle of. We are really in the middle of an evolution to make sure that we are shifting our instructional practices to meet the needs of our student. And it is an awesome challenge that we are progressing through. So I want to share a little bit of context about Greenville because some of the details about us as a district dramatically impact our academic operations. And I certainly am not going to read all of this, but I do want to point out a couple specific things. Greenville County Schools is the largest school district in the state of South Carolina. We are the 44th largest district in the nation, serving just short of 80,000 students. We grow somewhere north of 1,000 children a year. And so we are continuously expanding. But the most interesting, in my opinion, detail on that is actually in the top corner. We serve students whose home languages represent 76 different languages. So when we talk about supporting ML services, multilingual learners, we are not just talking about serving Spanish-speaking families. We have 76 different languages spoken by children in our district, students in our district. We have 106 facilities. When we're talking today in the context of our literacy instruction in elementary, that represents 51 different elementary schools. So when we're talking about system-wide initiatives, we're talking about a very large system. When we talk about some of the things that we are trying to push out for consistency across a district, we're talking about 51 very distinct entities that have their own unique cultures and their own unique communities. And so it is our job and our responsibility as a district academics team to produce supports that they can use, but then also make sure that they can personalize those things to meet the needs of their learners. As I said, we are expanding. You can see there a list of all of the different schools that are getting expansions, and we're also in the process of building a brand new elementary school. We'll be 52 elementary schools in 2 years. This is probably the biggest misnomer, and for those of you who have joined us in downtown Greenville, it is very easy to look around downtown and make an assumption about the socioeconomics of our community. If you arrive downtown, it would be very easy to think that we do not have a significant number of pupils in poverty, and that would be incorrect. So in Greenville County, as a district, we have almost 56% of our students in poverty, which of course there is significant research about students and the challenges that they face being in poverty, both academically and then of course socially. So that is something that, that we certainly have to take into consideration. We have, as part of our challenges, we have a large number of students who are transient students, not just in and out of the district, but between locations inside of our district. So again, when we're speaking about resources and we're talking about curriculum maps and supports, we need to have a system in place that allows for students to be successful no matter where they enter or where they transition to. Again, that's our percentage of ML students. We are just almost short of 19%, and we have 2.1% of our students who are homeless. But despite that, despite all the challenges that we have, we are very proud of the academic gains, especially just as a national trend. We know everyone is coming out of COVID and trying to recover from that. So we are very proud of the dedication of our teachers and our school leaders to be able to outperform our state, to have 96% of our schools maintain or increase their ELA math and science scores, and 84% of our elementary schools have now met or exceeded their pre-pandemic scores, which was our initial target. Of course, we wanted to make sure that we are in the process of recovering. And then, of course, we know this is just one data point from one assessment, but this is just one way that we can measure that continuous improvement. And on our state report cards for this past year, 91% of our elementary schools earned an excellent, good, or average rating. 37% of those were in the top rating of excellent. So we have some things that are going very well, but we always have opportunities to grow, and that's why we're excited today to be able to spend some time together. We are currently, as I said, in the middle of an evolution, and this is, of course, very consistent with the national trend in terms of literacy instruction. We are progressing into the science of reading, the awareness of the body of research that is the science of reading, and we are making strides in ensuring that the resources and that our literacy framework supports those different components of Scarborough's rope. We offer many different curriculum maps for our teachers to be able to utilize that are utilizing evidence-based, resource-based resources. And we also have explicit phonics instruction. And our job as an academics department is to help teachers and building leaders understand those components have to work together and not teaching things in isolation. And of course, we'll learn more about that today. This is, of course, very consistent with all of the different foundational skills that we know a student needs to become an independent reader, a successful independent reader. And in Greenville specifically, when we look at the bottom two, oral language and phonemic awareness, those are things that we tend to really focus on in our pre-K, our early childhood classrooms. But of course, with the number of students and transient students that we have coming in, those are also things that we address in much later grades than we typically had to in the past. So this is really our comprehensive building blocks that we very clearly stole from Literate Nation. But this is a great representation of our philosophical belief of what needs to happen for our students to become successful. And I love this graphic because it really shows how difficult it is for a child to be successful at an upper level if they have not mastered or had the opportunity to master the skills at the lower levels. So based on that, and again, remembering this evolution that we have gone through, we really are working with taking what was in place and the resources that have historically been in place in our district, and we wanted to give teachers and schools opportunities to take vetted resources, high quality resources, and be able to use those resources in ways to make sure we were meeting all of what we know to be the necessary components for children to learn. And so we created this graphic to help our teachers understand where those components fit within the framework that we offer, and we support them through the academics department on making sure that they feel qualified and they feel confident in being able to offer that instruction. But this is a great graphic for us as well to make sure that those components are in place and we're making sure that we are reaching each of the different strands within Scarborough's rope. This is another graphic. This is just one option that our teachers have. They're very familiar with the framework, and in many districts that are joining us, you maybe also have a literacy framework that's similar to this. But this was an opportunity, again, for us to dive into each of the specific components of our framework to help teachers identify with intentionality what should live within each one of those pieces so that teachers can understand how they all work together to support literacy. I mentioned before our district size. And because of our size and because of the different needs of our schools and our students, it is very challenging for us to go back. It's our lit venture. It's our great opportunity. It's our great challenge to be able to create consistent platforms that can be differentiated for school needs. And specifically, we have some things in place that help us successfully do that work. In Greenville, we have an instructional coach and a literacy coach at every elementary location. So our team works closely with those coaches to be able to give them the capacity to support teachers in the trenches with students. We also have predictive benchmarks that we use in the state of South Carolina that's very tied to our end-of-year assessments. We, of course, use literacy screeners. We're very data-rich, and we work really hard to support teachers in progress monitoring so that we can make sure that our children are progressing. But we have to balance that in a way that we do not kill the joy of reading. And that's really the challenge. We want to make sure that we don't take our hands off of students and make sure that our teachers aren't just assuming that they are progressing, but we really want to make sure that we also don't turn our classrooms into a place where children don't enjoy being. We do have several different PLP schools, and if you're not from South Carolina, PLP, Palmetto Literacy Project, is a state designation for schools who have third graders who are not showing academic success. And so once a school is identified as a Palmetto Literacy Project, the state has provided LETRS training, which is many of you know, is a primary literacy instruction professional development, heavily focused on phonics instruction, very science of reading based. We also have selected a specific curriculum to support that work in those schools, but our remaining schools utilize 2 different maps, again, to meet the very different needs of our district. So for those of us who are here and joining us from districts, this was our approach and our opportunity to kind of lay the foundation, to offer different options for schools, to be able to transition into best practice, to norm the resources that we are using across such a large district, to have consistent data points that we could collect across the district, but also still have some autonomy at the building level and also some differentiation to meet the needs of specific groups of children. We have an MTSS approach. So of course, everybody is familiar with that. These are just some of the resources that we use across our tiers. We of course believe that you cannot remediate your way out of a tier 1 issue. Your tier 1 has to be strong. It has to be the strongest opportunity for your children to receive the best standards-based instruction possible. But we do have students who need additional supports. And so we of course have a different system in place to make sure that we are supporting all children. But this is our current reality, that despite those first few slides where we talked about our celebrations, we still have very specific growth opportunities. And I'm very transparent. I feel like the only way that we can improve these things is to acknowledge that we have these challenges and learn from people who are in the same position. So for us, we are still working on making sure that tier 1 is top notch for all kids, that it's consistently high quality so that our children have access to the best possible education in that tier 1 setting. We do want to make sure that our students who are receiving special ed supports are not learning skill sets that they cannot transfer back into the gen ed setting. We do not want children progressing in silos. And we want to make sure that our departments are collaborating and working together. We are still in a place in elementary, and I don't know if this is the same for you, but we're still trying to differentiate academic needs versus behavioral needs, especially coming out of COVID. And that's just a trend that we're seeing that we're trying to support our schools and our teachers with. We, as I mentioned before, are looking at in-class intervention to make sure that when children do need additional MTSS support, if we can keep them in the classroom to offer those interventions, that they're high quality and that also teachers can be intentional and strategic with those. Finally, we're going to continue to close our achievement gaps and then make sure that we continue to support our district our size, but not make it a cookie cutter approach. So we are very excited to have the opportunity to learn from our keynote speaker. My team is joining us today, and so I know that they are frantically going to be taking notes and making their questions available. But I do just want to introduce our keynote presenter, Dr. Laura Tortorelli. She is an associate professor at the University. Oh, I almost said the University of Michigan, which would have been a huge flaw. At Michigan State, those would have been fighting words. At Michigan State University. Her research focuses on how teachers teach children to read with a focus on bridging the divides between research and practice. She's been named an emerging scholar by the Hall of Reading fame and selected for mentoring programs by the American Educational Research Association and the Society for Research in Child Development. She is actively involved in statewide literacy, including training state literacy coaches on the literacy essentials and developing online modules on letter-sound relationships. So we are honored and delighted to welcome Dr. Laura Tortorelli.
Thank you. So I'm just gonna keep my notes up here in case I need them. All right, hi everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and to be part of this lit venture in Greenville schools. And I've really enjoyed learning more about the district and hearing about the challenges that you're facing, which are very similar to challenges that many districts I've worked with in Michigan and across the country have faced. And it is true that I am from Michigan State University. I have a 4-year-old, and if he hears somebody say Michigan, like even just like the state name, he goes, state, so that people don't confuse Michigan and Michigan State. So I appreciate that correction. But what I want to talk about today is the science of teaching reading. We hear a lot about on social media and on podcasts and the media about the science of reading. But what I do is the science of teaching reading. I teach teachers how to teach reading. I got my degree in reading education, my PhD from the University of Virginia, and then I've been at Michigan State ever since. And my research agenda really focuses on how kids learn to read and write across the elementary grades. So not just in kindergarten and first grade, but how that's a developmental process that we need to support the whole time. And I also specifically look at the challenges of informational texts and the supports kids need to read those, and how digital texts are being used in classroom context. So that's my research base. I'm also currently an associate editor of The Reading Teacher. So if you are familiar with that journal, that's another way that I try to bridge my research to practice. And so today I want to talk a little bit about just what is the science of reading from my perspective, what theoretical work and, and prior empirical work guides my research and work with teachers in schools. Then I'm going to talk about some myths about the science of reading as applied to the science of teaching and reading. And then I'm going to dive into things that we want to look for in our curricula and instructional practices to make sure that we're aligning what we're doing in classrooms with students every day to the best evidence that we have from research, and making sure that we're providing adequate support for students throughout their academic careers. So what is the science of reading versus the science of teaching reading, and why am I making this distinction? I'm sure many people, here in the room and online have heard enough about the science of reading, are tired of hearing about the science of reading, but the reason I think we still need to keep talking about it is this distinction here. What I do is the science of teaching reading. But if you are all, there's all these podcasts and laws, and in Michigan, we have parents suing Detroit Public Schools for not teaching their kids how to read. We have editorials. We have a 3rd grade reading law in Michigan that retains students who aren't on grade level by at the end of 3rd grade. And then there's legislation across the country focusing on improving our reading instruction. And this is all great. Like, I'm excited about this, but people are concerned, right? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the concerns, how I perceive the science of reading, how it influences my work with teachers, and what some of those concerns are. So when people are referring to the science of reading in podcasts, in editorials, on social media, oftentimes they're referring to a pretty incredible body of research that shows us what's happening inside a kid's brain or an adult's brain while they're reading, right? So this is cognitive psychology research and neuroscience, right? So really giving us an insight into reading processes, which is fantastic. I mean, this is an amazing thing that we've been able to discover through scientific research, how reading happens in the brain. And so a lot of this is actually science studies where we've actually been like putting on little electrodes on people's heads as they read, right? And finding out how they respond and what areas of the brain light up. And that's fascinating. A lot of it is also done by eye tracking techniques where we actually like watch how readers process text as their eyes are going across the page. And so this is fantastic. And it does tell us quite a bit about the reading process as a cognitive process. And so that's the science of reading. That's what we're trying to align our instructional practices to. But you'll notice that the science of teaching reading is a little bit different, right? That's not happening just inside a child's brain. That's happening in a classroom with a bunch of different kids who've all come from different home environments and prior educational experiences, with a teacher who's had her particular or his particular or their particular prior research and experiences in education. And then there's social interactions, right? And purposes and things happening all around that. So you'll notice that these same research scientists who are, absolute pillars in the science of reading, when they write about the science of teaching reading, they actually, which they also do, hold on. So these are all things written by the same authors about the science of teaching reading. Hold on. Can I get, it's not going forward. You'll notice that there's a lot of question marks suddenly in their titles. Everything's very, everything over here is very like confident. Everything over here is very fuzzy, right? They're like, how should reading be taught? Question mark. Rainer, one of the pillars of the science of reading. Lost in translation, challenges in connecting reading science and educational practice. By Seidenberg, one of the pillars of the science of reading. Pragmatic challenges for bridging education and neuroscience. All right, so this is, the challenges that you are experiencing in making sure we're delivering this best practice is here in this district is not, it's not confined just here to Greenville. Like this is something that is known and documented in the field, even by the people who do that foundational research. So that's where I come in. I try to do research that bridges that gap. I don't do the brain science. I build on the brain science and I work with teachers and students in different school communities to figure out what instructional practices are working for them, what isn't working for them, how can we can make that improvement. So I'm sure everybody's seen this a million times, right? The simple view of reading posits that reading comprehension, which is the ultimate goal of all our reading instruction, is a product of decoding and linguistic comprehension. And this is a great model. This is all over social media also, but it's not an instructional model, right? It tells us how any given reader is going to encounter a text, right? They're going to apply their decoding skills, they're going to apply their linguistic comprehension skills, and they're going to comprehend or not that text. But it doesn't actually tell us how to teach those things. And in fact, some cases, I think this is getting misunderstood as like, if we just do a ton of decoding instruction first, and then later do a bunch of linguistic comprehension instruction, then they'll just be able to comprehend. And that's not true. We actually need to support kids in doing both and using them simultaneously to comprehend all the way through. But this is, there's a ton of research on the simple view of reading, probably hundreds and hundreds of studies that have demonstrated that this equation works, over and over again. But it works to predict a given individual's reading comprehension. It doesn't tell you how they got there, right? So I wanted to highlight some other models of reading and some insights from the science of reading that guide my work with teachers and supporting readers throughout the elementary grades. And so my understanding of how children learn to read words is a 3-step process. First, they have orthographic mapping. Second, connecting to meaning processors. And third, building lexical memory. And so I'm going to talk about what those things are and why I think those are important for instruction. So orthographic mapping is Linnea Airey's description of how children learn to read words. And so basically the idea is to store a word in memory. Children need to map each sound that they hear in a word to the letter or letters that represent it in that word, right? And so this is a little bit different from just phonics instruction, right? Phonics instruction is important because it gives them the tools to do the orthographic mapping, but actually what is going to help kids store words in memory and have them available for future reading opportunities and writing opportunities too, because they can use this orthographic mapping for spelling as well as reading, is taking the time to process each letter sound correspondence in a word. And it doesn't have to be a regular word, right? You can orthographically map an irregular word by processing the letter sound correspondences. So in a regular word like cat, kids need to learn that it's k, that k is represented by C, not K. My 4-year-old's having a hard time with that CK thing right now. That A is represented, that A is represented by A, and that T is represented by T, and when you put them together, that's the word cat. But kids are, and with rock, we have a little bit more complex situation because they have to get the C and the K together. And remember that those represent just one k sound. I don't know if you've ever seen a little kid try to go rock, and you're like, actually, those together just make those sound once. You're good. But even words like said, right? They still, even though it's not a regular word, they still need to process how the sounds and letters are mapped together in this particular word. So S represents the S, AI represents the eh, and D represents the D sound. So they need to remember and map in their lexical memory that weird translation of the AI pattern for just this particular word. So phonics instruction is incredibly important because it helps them navigate these complexities, right? And helps them figure this out. But it's not the end all, it's not the end, it's the beginning, because the process that we're trying to support them in is doing this orthographic mapping, which is an item by item process. They have to do this for every word that they encounter in text, but not every time, right? As you know, as become more fluent readers, they are not stopping and decoding every word sound by sound because they've seen them before. They've gone through the orthographic mapping process, and that word is now available in their lexical memory for future reading. The reason why it's important to slow down and get this right is because every word that you put into your word bank, your memory bank this way, is like a savings account you get to draw on for the rest of your academic career, right? It's creating cognitive efficiencies for the rest of your reading life because you've got this word all squared away, right? And so you have to so teaching kids phonics is important. Allowing them to apply it to lots and lots of words is even more important. But we don't stop there. The words also have to be connected to meaning. And we leave this part out a lot when we talk about beginning reading instruction or phonics instruction. We act like it's just a decoding task. But actually connecting the word to its meaning is part of how it's stored in lexical memory. You don't have a separate language processor and a separate orthographic processor for each word. Those things are linked in your memory. So once kids learn the spelling and connect it to the pronunciation, they then have access to all the different meanings of the word. They have to identify the context appropriate meaning so that we want to build up their vocabulary knowledge of these words as well. And they also have to be able to connect a particular word to all its derived forms, right? To recognize it as part of a compound word, to recognize it when it is a past tense or present tense or plural word. So in fact, it's not just about decoding the word, but it's about building up what we call lexical quality for words by connecting to meaning throughout the reading process. So again, phonics instruction is super, super important, but coding words and practicing in isolation will never actually be enough to support everything that kids need to know about words. And so, here are my cute little examples of the multiple meanings. So words have multiple meanings, and kids need to encounter them in multiple contexts so that they can build up their understanding of that word and have it accessible, not just for decoding, but for comprehension processes and meaning making throughout. And so third is what I said called building lexical memory. So, they figure out the word, they map it, they connect to meaning, and then they build that lexical memory over time. And so a lot of my research, particularly my dissertation research at the University of Virginia, was around reading fluency and how kids develop reading fluency and how fast they read different types of texts, like informational texts versus narrative text, that kind of thing. And so fluency is really important because when kids start reading, they actually have to divide their attentional resources between the decoding and comprehension tasks. And I'm sure you've seen this, kids read each word in the sentence, they get to the end of the sentence, and then they have to kind of go back and make sense of the sentence, right? Because it takes so much cognitive energy to do that orthographic mapping the first time you encounter a word in print. But the idea is that by going through this process, by orthographically mapping lots and lots of words and committing them to memory and connecting them to meaning and building really robust word representations in memory, over time the word recognition part becomes really automatic for most words. Not all words. You're still going to encounter new words all the time in texts, which is part of why it's such a valuable experience. But many, many words you encounter will be words you have mapped and recognized before and are automatically available to you. And so then the attentional resources you have to devote to decoding go way, way, way down. And you're able to read longer books, to get lost in the story, to devote all of your resources to figuring out who stole the thing or what you're learning from the text. And so that's when we think about making sure kids learn to love reading, which I absolutely agree. This is when it really happens, right? When kids can pick up a book and get lost in it because the decoding challenge of the book is at or near their decoding level of their decoding skills, right? So we're building up their lexical memory so that they don't have to spend all of their time decoding the words. They're able to pay attention to the story and really get lost in the story. And this is a critical hinge point in development because it supports that love of reading. So that's that's the research those are the foundational research pieces that kind of go a little bit beyond the simple view of reading that my research and my work with teachers really tries to encourage. I now want to talk about some myths about the science of teaching reading that I see all over social media. I don't know if any of you follow the Reading Teacher on Twitter, but we are having a big brouhaha this week because the lead editor published something that bought into a bunch of myths about the science of teaching reading without any of the associate editors seeing it first, and it's a big mess. And so, I think it's really important to think about this. I'm sure for you, these aren't things that you're concerned, for many of us, we're not concerned about these things, but there really are people you're going to be working with in schools who have these concerns, right? Who have gotten the wrong idea from social media or from somewhere else that kind of that become roadblocks in the conversation for moving forward our instruction. So this is just a little fun thing. Have you ever played Two Truths and a Lie? All right, so this is not exactly that. This is two myths and a maybe. All right, so two things that I think are absolutely myths based on the research. One thing that can be true or is sometimes true. So in the chat, take a look at these three statements. Think about this. You can talk in your tables here, but in the chat you can comment about which two you think are myths and which one is maybe true. So the first one is teaching aligned with the science of reading means teaching only phonics. And it's really only good for beginning or struggling readers. This is a K1 problem. And once you've gotten the phonics part right, you can move on. It's not important. Number two, teaching aligned with science reading makes students hate reading. Obviously, this is something we want to be very careful about. And then three, teaching aligned with science of reading is only appropriate for white middle-class monolingual English-speaking students. So in your table or in the chat, comment about which ones of these have you heard and where? Have you heard people say these things? Is this something that people who are concerned about? And which two you think are myths and which one is sort of true?
We have a few coming in the chat as well.
What do we think?
1 and 3 are myths, maybe.
Okay.
We also have, 2 can be a maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Another 2 is the maybe depending on the delivery.
Yeah, there's some implementation concerns there. Okay. How about our in the room? What do you think?
We definitely think that number 2 is 10.
Mm-hmm.
I'm questionable on 3.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know about 3.
Yeah. Oh, this is big. We're in Michigan right now because we have these, very large urban districts that, where, like, for example, Detroit, where the parents are suing, right? There's a concern that we are going to take solutions that were developed, for primarily, for white students and just like import them into those districts, and they might not be appropriate. Have you heard things like this from people before? Seen it on social media? Okay, I'm not like shocking anybody. Okay, great. That's good. Okay, so I'm gonna do a little answer key and talk about my understanding of what the research says about each one of these things. So I do not think that number 1 is true. Teaching aligned with the science of reading is not just for beginning or struggling readers. And this is really important to keep in mind because I think that both advocates for the science of reading and people who are opposed to the science of reading or concerned about it can both make a mistake of focusing too much attention on very, very beginning reading, on what happens at the beginning of kindergarten and first grade, and don't pay attention to the long game. But as you can tell from the theoretical models that I was discussing, learning to be a proficient reader is a long-term process that requires thoughtful evidence-based support for word recognition throughout the elementary grades, right? So I think it's important that we understand that, and that that when we're teaching aligned with science of reading, we're really building the foundation for comprehension and learning for like a long-term academic career. We're not trying to just do phonics. We're trying to do it all. And one thing that I think is really important for teachers to understand is that a struggling or disabled reader is not a fixed category, right? There's not just this one group of kids. It's not just that everyone's doing great in your kindergarten class except for these kids with IEPs, right? Like that's not okay, right? But it's also not inevitable that so many kids are going to struggle with reading. In fact, Valentino and Scanlon's research used in the interactive strategies approach showed us that when kids get really good tier 1 instruction and appropriate tier 2 follow-up that help them with their letter-sound relationships, help them do that orthographic mapping, connecting to meaning and building lexical memory, they are statistically much less likely to be identified as having reading disabilities later on. That's not to say that some kids won't always have them. They absolutely will. Dyslexia is a real thing. But the way that school systems work, there are many kids who are getting identified as having reading disabilities simply because they haven't gotten the amount of instruction and support that they need to transition into proficient readers. And so this is not just about kindergarten, first grade. It starts there, but really making sure that the supports are there for kids to do really deep work around reading throughout the grades will prevent them from actually being added to that category. So first of all, the idea that there is some category of struggling readers that is different from our other kids and like only some people need this, like that's just not true. What we find is that that category is really fungible and that many fewer kids go on to need additional supports in the later grades and falling into that category of struggling readers if we can support them appropriately throughout. But we also find when we get up to fifth grade that kids have to meet what Wang and colleagues have educational testing service have called the decoding threshold. And this is a threshold that's in that they have identified at the end of fifth grade, not at the end of kindergarten or first grade, but by the end of fifth grade, the ability to decode multisyllabic words, including single syllable words, but also multisyllabic words, is predictive of their future reading growth. So if kids do not meet this threshold of decoding ability and word recognition ability by the end of fifth grade, that their reading comprehension growth is flat in the subsequent years. They do not continue to make progress in reading comprehension. And they estimate that up to 38% of fifth grade students are currently not meeting this threshold. And these are not kids who are, don't know there's letters and sounds. These are kids who can read a lot of words, but they haven't gotten the sustained systematic support throughout the elementary grades that allow them to read the words that they need to read in these upper level texts. Freddie Hebert has identified that in grade level texts, each year in elementary school, kids encounter 20,000 new words. So they have to keep getting support for decoding those words all the way through the elementary grades to be in a position to benefit from secondary instruction. And also, what we found is that doing this good work supports kids to achieving the ultimate goal of education, which is graduating from high school. Hernandez found that 1 in 6 kids who is not reading proficiently by the end of third grade will not go on to graduate. And that increases to 1 in 4 kids for kids who are living in poverty. So if a kid is living in poverty and it has not achieved grade level reading proficiency by the end of third grade, they have a 25% chance of dropping out before high school graduation. And it goes up to 36% for children who are also from minoritized communities, so Black and Latino communities. So that's a third of kids who are in these minoritized and disadvantaged roles in our schools who do not achieve reading proficiency by the end of third grade will drop out before the end of high school. So this is not just about kindergarten or first grade, right? This is about setting children up for a lifetime of success, of making them feel like they belong in school and can do the school things, and about not layering on additional burdens for kids when they're already dealing with other types of disadvantages. All right, so that was number 1. Number 2, teaching aligned with the science of reading makes students hate reading. I hear this all the time. it's definitely possible to do teaching a life of the science of reading that would make kids hate reading, but that's not what the research shows overall. That's not the typical pattern. I guess you could have a rogue teacher who did that, but that's not necessary or at all. In fact, what we find is that teaching life of the science of reading is crucial for supporting reading motivation and self-concept throughout the elementary grades. And so what we find is that in kindergarten, students start school with a lot of motivation to read. If you ask a kindergartner what you're going to learn this year, they say they're going to learn to read, right? And then unfortunately they get there and sometimes that doesn't really happen. And then it's like pretty deflating actually. But so yeah, kids start school with high literacy motivation. And importantly, in kindergarten, literacy motivation and literacy and reading skill are uncorrelated. Like good readers love reading, bad readers love reading. Like they don't internalize any of that yet at the beginning of school, but that doesn't last. What happens very quickly is that they become reading motivation and reading skill become more closely correlated over time across the elementary grades. So every year at school, these two things become more highly correlated. And what the research shows is really that this is a cycle. Basically, kids who can read and who are building these reading skills at a fast pace, they do more reading. They are motivated to read more, and so they do more reading, and so they get better at reading, right? Because if you think back to our theoretical models, that orthographic mapping and connecting to meaning and learning all the different meanings of words in different contexts, and building fluency, all of that is dependent on lots and lots of reading. The more reading you do, the better a reader you become. And so to do that, kids need to be motivated. So if they're good readers, they tend to feel good about reading. They tend to engage in reading when it's either when they're offered opportunities in school or have like free time at home. And then they just continue to build up those skills and achievement. But it also works the other way, right? Kids who don't feel like they have the skills to read, they do anything they can to avoid it. I'm sure you've seen this in class too. I always show my teacher candidates in my teacher prep program what it looks like when kids fake read, right? When you've given them a book and they're like looking around at the other kids, seeing what page they're on, flipping over to that page, wondering when it's going to be done, pulling somebody's hair, right? Like they're having a hard time, right? So if they can't read or they feel like they can't read, then they don't do it. They look for ways to avoid it. They don't engage in the reading, and then they're losing those opportunities to increase achievement through practice. And then it gets worse, right? Every year the texts get harder, 20,000 new words a year, and so it just keeps falling further and further behind. So I like to think of this as a virtuous circle. We want to get kids on the right side and keep them going in the right direction. But Miyamoto and colleagues actually called it a vicious cycle, where readers who are struggling feel really unmotivated to read, have bad reading, avoid reading, don't make progress, and then feel like their negative self-concept about reading is confirmed over time. So we actually need to support those reading skills because those they can kickstart the reading motivation cycle. So just as an example, I wanted to show you a little, I have something in the slides where we get to try this. And again, I'm going to focus on not kids who have just started to read, but kids who have some reading skills, right? What is it like for kids who are okay readers, right? Who kind of have gotten through kindergarten, first grade, sort of, doing okay, but they haven't really gotten deep intentional instruction around word reading. Maybe they did in kindergarten and first grade, but it hasn't continued, right? What is it like for them to read a text, a grade level text at the end of elementary school, like third or fourth grade? All right, so we're going to try this. So I mentioned to some of you when we were chatting beforehand that my first teaching job was in Japan. Japan has a very complex orthography. We always hear people complain that English is complex, but Japanese is also very complex. They actually have 3 different alphabetic systems. And this one is a syllabary called katakana that represents only words that have been imported from foreign languages into Japanese. So my name was written in katakana, and things like television are written in katakana. And so they have actually have a whole different alphabet for native Japanese words, and then this alphabet, and then they have a third kanji system that they've imported from the Chinese. It's very complicated. But So here's our cheat sheet. If you want to use this QR code, it'll take you to like the full cheat sheet if you want to actually try to decode what we're going to read. But basically, here's an example of an informational text that we ask kids to read in 3rd or 4th grade. And this is, I have substituted out the types of words that kids in 3rd and 4th grade often have trouble reading. So you can see that this is not the experience of a kid who can't read at all, right? This is the experience of a kid who's gotten some word reading instruction, but it hasn't been as deep and intense as we need. So these words have been translated into katakana. So your choice is to, when you come across these words, well, actually, why don't you just turn and talk and take a look at this and say in the chat, and put in the chat, what do you do when you come to a text like this that's full of words that you can't read? What is the experience of trying to read this like? Just take a minute to try to do this.
Someone from the chat said that they guess.
Yeah, you could go and look up all the katakana and try to decode it letter by letter, but it's overwhelming, right? It's not just one word, it's a bunch of words. Like, so you're gonna guess. Yep.
Or you read the word you do know, and then try to like access previous knowledge of what it probably is, and then you sit back and wait for someone else in the classroom to let you know whether or not you're close to being right.
Oh, I know. Have you ever tried to do this where you like you're trying to have a conversation about, a discussion of a book with the kids, and you're like, so in this book, this book is about, mammals, and some kids are like, well, I went to the zoo and they had a turtle, and the turtle is 100 years old, and they said the turtle never goes in the water. And you're like, okay, you're really trying to tell me other things to substitute for the fact that you can't get at what's in here, right? Like, so yeah, you're gonna like draw on your own prior knowledge and then maybe try to like steer the conversation that way so nobody knows that you couldn't read it. Anything else in the chat?
Yep, use context clues and just think, what do they think it is? If it's a noun, a verb.
Yep, use parts of, so all those guessing strategies, right? Or like that queuing system. So this is what you do. So what's really important to understand about the research is that those are things that you do when you can't access the words through decoding, right? When you have not had the opportunity to process these words and add them to your lexical memory. What Rayner's research and all that brain research I showed at the beginning shows us is that readers do not do those things unless they are blocked from decoding. Like if they can decode the word or recognize it automatically, they do. In fact, and like adult readers, proficient readers process every letter and every word as they read to confirm that they've got exactly the right word. They don't look at the first letter and guess. They don't like look before and after and try to figure out the word. They go linearly through the words. And it's only when they come to something they can't decode that they have to resort to these other strategies. So that's something to think about, right? Do we want to teach kids fix-up strategies for when they can't decode? Or do we want to get them to the point where they can read hard words, right? And they do this automatically so that they can spend that time thinking about the information in the text, not making guesses. Like all that stuff, like inferencing, using context clues, like thinking about parts of speech, that's all really good stuff, but you want them to use it for the content and the vocabulary, not for just figuring out what words are on the page, right? So, do you want to keep going? No, I'm just kidding. This is how I feel. Like, can you imagine though how this feels if this is what you're being asked to do? Like it's totally overwhelming.
We were all willing.
Yeah.
And then you started adding more slides, and we were like, oh, never mind.
I'm out. Yeah. I'm out. Right. Yeah. So like, how does that feel? Like, do you feel like you're a good reader? Do you feel like you love reading? Yeah. Do you feel like you want to go answer a bunch of comprehension questions? Yeah, this is not a good feeling. And this is what we find too. We're always talking about the NAEP results, right? How kids are not passing, demonstrating reading proficiency in the NAEP in 4th grade. And yes, that's true, and it's a problem. You know, like I hate looking at the NAEP results from post-pandemic, because we basically like went right back to where we were in 2000 when I just got out of college, and so that's depressing by itself. But I actually think this finding, which was actually done in 2019, so before the pandemic, is equally important, which is that students don't believe they can read and comprehend grade level texts, right? It's almost exactly the same number of students in 4th and 8th grade who score at below basic who say that they can't do it. Like, they know they can't do it, right? So reading motivation and reading skill really have to go hand in hand throughout. So we can't just promote reading motivation without also promoting reading skill. And promoting that reading skill goes a long way to building reading motivation. It doesn't do all of it. Obviously, if we just like drill them on flashcards all day, I mean, that wouldn't be the appropriate way to teach it anyway, but like if we were just drilling them all day, they would not love reading. We have to do other things to support that too, but the two things really have to work together. So, and now we're at number 3. Teaching aligned with the science of reading is only appropriate for white, middle-class, English-speaking students. And I have this as a maybe. And here's the reason. It doesn't have to be this way, but there are reasons to be concerned about how we're doing this. But teaching aligned with the science of reading, it has to include culturally and linguistically diverse students. We can't leave them out, right? We can't take what we know from the best research about this and like say, well, oh, we're just not going to do it for them. Like that's not okay. But this is an area where more research is needed, right? And this is something that I'm very actually optimistic and excited about as far as being in the field right now. But something just to like a very fair criticism that I have heard is that all of these guys that we talked about earlier are all old white guys, right? They're all old white guys, and they did a lot of this research in primarily white schools, and that's true, right? That is a lot of these papers are quite old, you'll see, 1989, you know, some of this foundational research. So yeah, there's reasons to ask, like, are we thinking about everybody? Are we including all of our students in this research? But something that everyone doesn't know is that one of the very first studies of the simple view of reading was done with English, Spanish bilingual children. And there have been actually dozens and dozens of studies testing the simple view of reading for multilingual learners in different orthographies for different languages. And in fact, a lot of that does hold up. Like that the idea that we need to support decoding skill, like really build up decoding skills and language comprehension, and that everyone relies on both of those to read. That's true whatever language you're reading in. It's true whether you're a native English speaker or a multilingual learner. So there has been some research, and there's definitely other people who are trying to integrate, who are trying to integrate culturally relevant instruction with scientific and evidence-based reading. And so here's like a matrix that Ellen McIntyre at the University of Tennessee made for a textbook that we use in one of our classes, and basically highlights that there isn't a conflict between these two things. We just need to be better at knitting them together, right? It's totally possible to teach evidence-based and science of reading aligned instruction that is appropriate and meshed with culturally responsive principles. It's not one or the other. We have to do both. And so there are and these are some of my favorite scholars who are doing the research on how Black kids in particular learn to read. There's also a bunch of people doing research on the multilingual learners that really supports what we need to change in our instructional practices to make sure that it's culturally appropriate for all learners. So Julie Washington and Catherine Rhodes have a project funded in a cohort that I'm in for a research project that I'm doing. And they talk a lot about just making sure that that our phonics instruction is accessible to kids with different dialects, right? That we don't make kids say the words the way we say them to participate and benefit from phonics instruction, that we help them connect to their oral language and their understanding of how the words sound, right? It's a really simple. April Baker Bell, who used to be at Michigan State, but now is at U of M. They stole her. She does a lot of work about like encouraging children to use Black English in the classroom and seeing that as taking an asset-based approach to language instruction. And then Nicole Patton-Terry is director of the Florida Center for Reading Research, and her research also highlights how evidence-based principles can be made more culturally appropriate for students and support them in their reading development. So it's not an either or. We do need more research on this topic. So that's why I call it a maybe. We need more research on the best ways to do this, but that research is happening. And so far, absolutely none of it has said that these kids need to do something else, right? They need the same things as far as beginning word, support for word recognition throughout the elementary grades, but they need it to be done in culturally appropriate ways, where we're not, for example, correcting children's speech in order to participate in phonics instruction, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So now that brings me to some of the science of reading curricula. I started out my career and people would ask me what reading curricula I recommend. And I was like, I don't recommend products. I just do this. I just do research. Like, I'm just a scientist. And then for years and years and years, people would come to me and they're like, what product? Okay, what curriculum should we get? What product should we get? And I was like, I don't do that. I don't do that. And then after working in Michigan for a few years and actually having my own son going to kindergarten and then seeing everything that happened during the pandemic, I was like, I've got to start recommending some products. So I don't recommend specific, I'm not going to recommend specific products because I know that, a lot of that's out of our control, right? School leaders have some control, but I know in South Carolina, you have a limited list of things you can even pick from as far as a reading curriculum. And so so what I encourage school leaders and teachers to do with their reading materials is to think about how to look for particular places and think about how your materials align or don't align with the goals of your reading instruction. And if you can replace them, great, but if you can't, create your own versions, right? Figure out what you need to adapt or change to actually make sure you're meeting the needs of all your students. And that's gonna be true no matter what curriculum you have. I was on a curriculum selection committee a few years ago for my son's district, and there is no perfect curriculum. We ended up picking what I thought was a very good curriculum, but still having some issues, particularly with the book choices, that they weren't as diverse and culturally appropriate as we wanted for our district. And so our literacy coaches ended up rewriting several of the lessons to focus books that reflected our community values better, but using the same reading strategies and word level support and everything else. So there's always some sort of so there's no perfect curriculum, I just want to say that. But I am seeing and talking to a lot of districts that are identifying new curricula and bringing in new resources and figuring out how to use them or not use them. And this is happening in some part because we're really focused on pandemic recovery, although it sounds like that's going really well here. But there's new legislation that limits or changes or recommends particular curricular resources. There's new sources of funding available. There's a lot of pressure from social media to make sure we're doing this correctly. And a lot of districts have been frustrated with the results of doing the same thing for many years and feeling like things are okay, but could be better. So I wanted to highlight, I'm not going to get into these in too much detail, but there are tools that exist that you can use to evaluate your curriculum and highlight areas of strength or weakness that you might want to supplement or change. Ed Reports really highlights how well curricula align to ELA standards. The Reading League has a very science of reading orientation that helps you identify whether or not you are teaching that beginning reading part adequately. And then there's a much more extensive rubric that was put out by the IS that really highlights all the evidence-based practices that you would want to find supported in your curriculum. So these are great resources for evaluating your curricular tools. And they'll have different takes on different parts. So this is for example, this is the phonological awareness part. And you can look at there are different criteria across these tools that focus on different things. This is the science of reading one, the Reading League one that really highlights practices aligned to the science of reading. And then this is the phonological and phonemic awareness part from the IES rubric. So the IES rubric, as you can see, is the most detailed. I think the other ones are a little bit easier, a little easier to use. It sort of depends on the purpose of your review. But there's also a curriculum scorecard for culturally responsive materials, which is actually really helpful. I wish they were more integrated into one tool, but we've got two. We've got different tools that can all do this. And they recently used this to evaluate I can't remember which three top curricula and identify some serious issues with the cultural responsiveness of the text included. And so this is definitely something to check out as well. And I think it helped us in our curriculum review process in East Lansing as well. But so here, so those are tools that are available to you. I'm going to highlight these 4 particular things that I tend to look for in language arts materials. And this might be one, whole box curriculum that you're using, or it might be materials that you are developing as a district, or it might be that you have a bunch of different programs. I actually am encountering this a lot. We're like, well, we had this, and then we just added in this, and then we added in this, and then we added in this. And so we actually, I work with schools that have a big curriculum closet now where there's almost too much stuff and they need to figure out what to use from what parts. But these are the 4 things I want to talk about a little bit today. We want to look for intensive, fast-paced phonological awareness and alphabet instruction. And I'll talk a little bit more about what all these are in a minute. We want to look for explicit, systematic instruction in phonics and spelling that goes beyond the beginning level, right? Not just letter sound correspondences, but supports kids with all of those complex spelling patterns throughout the upper grades. And then that continues on to instruction in multisyllabic decoding, and then authentic, culturally relevant texts that are matched to the instruction. So I'm going to talk a little about all 4 of those things in a little more detail. But first, I'm going to start with what you look for as a warning sign. I don't know. Have you ever heard this story? I think it was about Van Halen and the brown M&Ms. I think it was Van Halen. I might be getting my rock bands confused, but according to this legend, Van Halen had this very long contract that they made any venue they were going to perform in sign that was 40 pages long. It had multiple bullet points where this, the lights have to be set up like this, the stage has to be set up like this has to be happening. And then one of the lines halfway through was in the dressing room or the green room, there will be a bowl of M&Ms and it should have no brown M&Ms in it, right? And so this kind of got out as a legend about the spoiled rock star. He wants a bowl of M&Ms with no brown M&Ms in it. How crazy. But then later in an interview, he explained that because of the way his show was set up, he actually needed all the equipment to be set up correctly or it could be very dangerous for him and his crew, right? They do a lot of apparently lights and the other things. And so he needed to make sure that everything in the contract was being followed. So he included this line about the M&Ms because he could walk into his green room, look at the bowl of M&Ms, and if there's brown M&Ms in there, he knows he has to go back and check everything, right? Everything's off. They're not paying attention to the details. It's not that, he's got to go back and go through all 40 points and make sure that they were all done correctly, right? So I like to think of curriculum in this way, right? It's not if you have, there are some things that you want to look out for, and if you see it, you want to take a step back and look a little deeper, right? These are things that we want to take a look. So we're going to think about brown M&Ms in each of these categories, and then what we are looking for instead in each of these categories. So for phonological awareness and alphabet instruction, the brown M&Ms, the things that we're going to be concerned about is if we see a lot of oral-only phonological awareness activities. So that's when kids are never connecting those 2 letters, right? They're just talking. Talking's fine. It's fine to do some games like that, but if everything in your PA curriculum is oral only, that's a brown M&M for me. You're going to need to look at that a little more closely. Anything that emphasizes only songs and rhymes, particularly in kindergarten, as opposed to getting down to that nitty-gritty phonemic awareness, it's just not going to provide enough support for kids. Anything that spends a lot of time teaching letter names instead of sounds is not going to give kids enough support. A letter a week is not going to be fast enough if you think about that. You're going to get you're going to get most of the way through kindergarten before you've taught the whole alphabet. Anything that spends a lot of time on crafts or songs or stories around alphabet instruction instead of just direct and explicit instruction. Here's the letter, here's what it looks like, here's the uppercase version, here's the lowercase version, here are the sound, here's the sound or sounds that it makes, here it is in a book, here it is in a word, let's practice writing it. Those are the things that need to be happening. They don't need to be gluing macaroni to an M&M to an M for 20 minutes. That's not going to actually help them. If there's little repetition or review or not enough handwriting practice, all of those things will slow kids down at the beginning of their reading careers. Instead, what we're looking for is really fast-paced instruction. Kids show up in kindergarten ready to learn. They are excited. They are primed. They've had different experiences, but you want to make sure that everybody's getting exposure to all the things they need to learn to read. So you want to make sure they're doing phonemic segmenting and blending. So actually working at the sound level pretty early on, that your phonological awareness and alphabet instruction work together. That you don't spend 10 minutes here doing rhymes and songs, and then a phonics lesson that's totally unrelated. You want those things to be working together. You want to work through at least one letter a day at the beginning of kindergarten, or more. You can, some curriculum introduce 2 or 3 letters at a time, and then go back and review as needed, and make sure there's explicit handwriting support and practice for letter formation. I don't know about you, but the handwriting is bad in our district right now. Like there's something about the combination of the pandemic and all these digital tools that we've been trying to integrate that has just like cratered our handwriting. So we're really trying to get that back, because research shows that paying attention to how those letters are formed really helps kids with letter recognition and connecting the letters and sounds. So that's a really important part. So that's phonological awareness and alphabet instruction. When we come to phonics and spelling instruction, we want to make sure we're not teaching all these different strategies, right? We only resorted to those strategies when we couldn't read the words. We actually want to help them read the words. And we want to make sure that we're, even for high frequency words, we're helping them do that orthographic mapping. We don't want them to be and we want spelling and phonics to be integrated. We don't want them to have a spelling list that's too hard, because we want them to be able to use the same patterns to read and spell. We do not want them practicing nonsense words. You can use nonsense words are a good assessment, but if you think about how words are stored in memory, they're connected to meaning. So decoding a bunch of nonsense words isn't going to help advance them as far as instruction. It's fine to do it for assessment, just to learn about their letter sound knowledge, but you don't want to be teaching nonsense words. Also, there's some research that indicates that teaching nonsense words is very problematic for English language, for multilingual learners especially, because they're confused. They don't know what's real and what's not real. They're like always trying to figure out if it is a real word. And then limited opportunities to practice in text or writing. I see this a lot. Schools that have just like dropped in like a little phonics lesson into the rest of their literacy block, and it's not connected to anything, right? They do 15 minutes a day, and then they move on and do everything that they would have done anyway. So what you want to make sure is that all the phonics and spelling instruction, that they have opportunities to practice using those throughout the day. So what we are looking for is explicit systematic phonics and spelling instruction with support and practice decoding and encoding words letter by letter, part by part, including high frequency words. Meaning and context are definitely used to confirm, once you've decoded the word, that you have the right, that you've figured it out, but not used before that. Decoding is always the first line strategy. And then spelling and phonics instruction are integrated. All right, multisyllabic decoding, this is my big thing that I'm really on right now. We talk so much about how kids learn to read at the beginning. We don't talk enough about transitioning them into reading longer words. So we want to make sure that Freddie Hebert's research has shown that I think almost half of unique new words by the end of first grade are multisyllabic. And by the end of third grade, it's up to like 80% or something. So the new words that kids are encountering in text that they don't know how to read, they're multisyllabic words, even by the end of first grade. So we really need to make sure our instructional pace is meeting the demands of the words that kids need to read. And that when we're teaching them how to read multisyllabic words, we are focusing on the goal, which is to figure out what the word, decode it, not to perfectly syllabicate it. They don't need to be little linguists who can divide the word into syllables exactly right. They just need to be able to divide it into chunks for decoding. And a big part of that is morphology and connecting to vocabulary. Those parts help them figure out if they've gotten the right word or not after they've decoded it. But a lot of curriculum, like this is an example from a very popular fourth grade curriculum. These are 2-syllable words. These are words that kids need to be reading in first grade, right? This is way too slow. And all of these, and you'll notice this is all about how they're dividing. All the instruction here is about how they're dividing the word up, not about actually trying to read a new word. So what we're looking for is instruction, really high quality instruction in multisyllabic decoding and morphology, instruction with prefixes and suffixes beginning in first grade. Morphological instruction that focuses on derivational suffixes. Those are the ones that change words from one part of speech to another. Kids get really thrown off by those. One of the things I see kids do a lot is if they're reading a text like the one we were reading, they'll read like the wrong version of the word, right? So instead of saying, instead of reading beautiful, they just read beauty. And then that's the wrong part of speech. And then it throws off the rest of the sentence, right? And so then they're very confused and they have to stop and figure that out. Support for decoding new long words and texts, and opportunities to integrate decoding and vocabulary strategies in multisyllabic words. Because as you can see, morphemes, prefixes and suffixes, are about meaning as much as they are about decoding. All right, and now we're going to get into my own, one of my favorite subjects of my research, which is texts. And what we really what we really do not want is text leveled by numbers or letters. Those big big bins of texts that are divided up in that way, and I'll explain why in a minute. But this is a brown and a M&M. We don't want that. We don't want to group or label kids by text level. There's empirical reasons for this, but there's also like socio-emotional reasons for this. It's like very disheartening to be grouped and told that you're a level C reader or something like that. We don't want that. But tied to this is how much independent reading we're asking kindergartners and first graders to do, right? We don't want to ask kindergartners or first graders to read silently for 20 minutes. Right? That's not something that they're going to be able to do. And so the idea that there's some sort of magical text that will let them do that, if that's an expectation, then that's not going to be appropriate for most kids at this grade level. And again, separate phonics instruction or reading practice is a real no-no. Like, again, I see schools that are like, we're doing phonics now, we've fixed it. And they do 15 minutes of phonics and then they go right back to their leveled reading groups. And there's no correspondence between the two. So here I want to dig in a little bit deeper because I know that using texts in this way, assigning kids to text levels and having them do their independent reading practice is something that is near and dear to a lot of teachers that I've worked with. I've had teachers come up to me and say, well, I understand that we're not supposed to be using these leveled texts anymore, but it was really, I really want to be able to give them something that I know they can read, right? That really means something to me, to hand them a book and know they'll be able to read it. And what I say to them is like, I'm so sorry to take that away from you, but actually it was never true. That was never a true thing. And so my research on leveled text with Freddie Hebert, I just want to show a little bit of some of the things that we've done around this to illustrate that point. So the thing about, we took a corpus of 510 leveled texts for kindergarten and first grade from level A to J in the Fontes and Pinnell system, from three different publishers of leveled text. And we analyzed them for a bunch of different linguistic variables to figure out what it was that would predict a text being assigned to level A versus being assigned to level B versus assigned to level C, so that we could identify what challenges kids have when they're reading different levels, right? And there were a bunch of different variables that we looked at. These are just the word level variables. And I'll tell you that so these are variables from that measure mean log word frequency is the blue line. So that's how frequently words appear in texts. Decoding is the gray line. So that's how decodable the words are. And then semantic challenge, vocabulary challenge, is the yellow line. All of these indicators begin at 0 and go up to 5. Right? So the very first thing you see is that level A texts for very beginning readers are halfway up the scale, right? They're already, level A texts are not at the lowest level of decodability. They are halfway through the scale of decodability already. And there is and you'll notice that they're all over the place. Like B is a little harder to decode, C is a little harder to decode, D goes back down, and then there's this very gradual slope up after that. Same thing with, there's a little bit more increase in vocabulary difficulty. There's absolutely no difference in the frequency of the words. And none of these were statistically different at the different levels. So basically what that means is that in terms of word level challenge, there is no significant difference between a text and a level J text. So the beginning of kindergarten to the end of first grade, these texts all have the same level of word difficulty. So what that means is that kids are encountering words that they cannot read from the very beginning. And remember what happens when we encounter those words, we start to guess. Right? We start to fall back on those other strategies, and we're not processing the words and doing the mapping and actually making progress towards our goal of being fluent automatic readers. Freddie and I then took a bunch of samples of the level J texts and had a bunch of first graders read them. So this is 10 samples of level J texts so that's the end of first grade being read by first graders. And of course, the premise is that if you're either a level J reader or you're not, right? If you are a level J reader, all the level J texts should be pretty easy for you. If they're not, all of them should be harder for you. But if you look at the average of their reading accuracy, the word reading accuracy in the text, it's all over the place. There's no consistency from one text to another. We usually say we want kids reading at 90% accuracy. Half of them are below that, half of them are above that. Assigning kids to a text level does not produce consistent results in reading accuracy or fluency. Fluency was even worse. They're all over the place in reading fluency and comprehension of the text. So that idea that we can give kids a level text and they will be able to read it, it was never true. They actually aren't designed to be read by kids independently, right? What they are, is that they are ways to look like you are reading, right? Because they have that patterned, repetitive text. So they are designed. So Freddie, so other research that other researchers have done showed that if you give a beginning reader a text, they can read it more quickly than a decodable text, but not more accurately. So they're not slowing down and processing the words. They're just kind of making guesses, right? And kind of working their way through the text that way. So that doesn't help them move toward the goal of orthographically mapping all those words and increasing their lexical memory. Matthew Burns found that when we go through all that very elaborate system to assign kids to a text level by doing the whole reading benchmark series or something else, that kids are only able to read with accuracy in 25% of the books at that level. So similar to what Freddie and I were seeing, the kids do different, there's a lot of differences between the books at that level. And that reading leveled books does improve kids' ability to read level books because they get to know the patterns and that kind of thing, but it doesn't transfer to other texts in the future. And so this is why I'm saying that this is a brown M&M. I know that's hard for teachers sometimes to adjust to, but it really isn't. It's something that is a short-term fix, right? It can make kids feel and look like they're reading, but it doesn't actually provide them with the skills practice that they need to move forward and have that long-term successful academic trajectory. Usually what happens now is that when I finally convince teachers of that, they're like, great, we'll just go get a bunch of decodable texts. And that's good. But they're not all the same, right? There are problems with decodable texts too that have been identified in the research. In part, they are often kind of nonsensical. And so that meaning processor piece that we care about as far as storing words in lexical memory, we can't access that if the text is complete gibberish, right? Freddie Hebert likes to talk about a decodable text she saw that was about a con man shaving sheep. And she was like, this means nothing to anyone who's in first grade. This is nonsense. Also, I have used the Bob books before. These are very popular, but they're really strange. Kids find them very strange. I find this imagery particularly to be terrifying. I don't know what it is. So there are decodable text. So the switch to decodable text is a positive development because it is going to give kids those opportunities that they're not getting in level text, but they're not all the same. You have to look for ones that are good, right? Authentic, culturally relevant, and match to their level of instruction. And they feature diverse characters, culturally relevant and familiar settings, and include some informational texts, right? We don't want them to be reading nonsense. We come back to this, we don't want kids to hate reading at the end of this. We want to make sure we're connecting to meaning throughout. And so finding really good decodable texts that match the instruction they're getting, that give them opportunities to practice, is really the challenge here. Fortunately, there are lots of new decodable texts coming out now, and I know that Terry's going to talk about that, that do offer more opportunities. But for a long time, it was leveled texts or it was the Bob books, right? And that's just not true anymore. And I think teachers who have gotten, are resistant to decodable texts have often used those older ones and aren't familiar with all of the new options that are available. So we want to make sure that we have these built in. So in short, what kids need to really become good readers and strong readers and motivated readers and pursue all of their academic dreams is high quality word level instruction, absolutely. But then opportunities to read those words in texts and make sense of them and make meaning of them. Either thing by itself, which I think is or the two things separate, which is what we've been doing in a lot of places for a long time, is not going to do it. This needs to be recursive and connected, right? They need to learn some phonics patterns, practice reading those phonics patterns in text, decode a bunch of words, come back and get more help and support for reading the next, more complicated words using those phonics patterns, and grow over time through supported reading experiences. We can't just teach them some things and then send them off to read by themselves. Those two things need to be integrated. So that's all I have for today. I'm sorry, I feel like I talked forever, but I get really excited. So thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to answer questions from the chat and to have a conversation at lunch. But this is also my email. If anybody has follow-up questions, you can always reach out to me that way as well. So thank you so much.
That was awesome. And Dr. Tortorelli, you said you could talk about this forever.
Yes.
I could listen to you talk about this forever. My name is Terry King Hunt, like I said, and I just want to quickly really hit on a couple of things that Dr. Tortorelli really highlighted that I think are so important in the work that we do at Just Right Reader. We have more decodable books than any other company, and our decodable books really are relevant to all of the work that we just shared and that you just talked about, right? Our books are allowing students to see themselves through mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors, through relevant text that is decodable and is fun and engaging, those stories, right? I too used Bob books when I was teaching decoding, right? My grandmother, she was a speech pathologist, and she said really, really early, don't ever stop teaching phonics. So I was searching and searching for all sorts of things that would allow me to teach phonics, but I was stuck with the Bob books, and you're absolutely right. My children would be like, what is he doing? But our decodables have a text progression that is steeped in the science of reading, is really, really looked at by all of our researchers to ensure that we are teaching the explicit phonics skills in the progression that is best for students and their understanding of language and decoding and learning the letters, right? So each of our books focuses on an explicit phonics skill. And each of our books, remember I said we have the most decodables than any company, right? So as you get to a specific skill, let's say we're working with long O. Our long O books, we have 6 or 7 of them. So we have the opportunity for students to get the explicit instruction in the classroom, then take it and look at these books and see these skills on every page. All of our page, every single page has 20% of those focus skill words on each page. And our entire books are 80% decodable. So they're experiencing that success that you were talking about when they get these books in their hand, and then they're motivated because the text and the stories are so engaging and so fun and so vibrant and so culturally relevant. We have these texts in both Spanish and in English. And the other piece that makes these books so impactful and our product so beautiful is that once the teacher gives that explicit instruction in the classroom, they get the book, they can sit in small groups, and they can scan a QR code. The video comes up. It's a 2-minute engaging video where a teacher comes on the screen and goes through the lesson and asks the students to engage. Repeat the sound after me. What does this sound say? And then it's not front loading, because the research shows us that front loading the text is not where our power comes, but really teaching that explicit instruction so that when they get into the text, they're able to decode and enjoy that reading experience. I was speaking to someone earlier last week, and she said, we keep saying we want our students to love reading, but if they can't read, they can't learn to love reading. So it's really important for us to understand that when we're having them engage with the explicit lesson, we're giving them the power to decode so that they can enjoy and understand the story and fall in love with reading. We are not a curriculum. We are a resource that helps you create opportunities for multiple opportunities of practice within the curriculum, because we know that many of the curriculum says we have phonics, but then they have 2 books. Well, this gives us the opportunity to say, now here are some more books that can help you with this skill. You can think of our product in 2 different ways: classroom libraries and take-home decodables. And of course, you can have these books in the classroom so that teachers can utilize them. They love this. But this is the other piece. We also have those same books in take-home packs that allow the students to learn the skill in the classroom with their teachers, have that support. And then we have all of these books wrapped in these cute little Christmas gift basket wrapping, that they get to open up. It's like Christmas in the classroom, because now they get to take these books home with them in their backpack and do this same work at home. Each of the books comes with the QR code on the book as well, which is so powerful, because we're learning that we're seeing parents sitting next to their children watching these videos, and if they're language learners, they're learning how to read. They're learning how to teach their children this phonics instruction, and they're able to collaborate and work together. It is really, really powerful. I want to really quickly take us to 2 additional pieces. This is so impactful for our schools, because not only are we creating a product that is good for students, but we're also wrapping our arms around them to support every person involved in the learning, so that the administrators know where to look for those brown M&Ms, right? And then the teachers now have this seamless implementation that allows them to say, this is what set I need for the area that I'm working on today. This is how I'm going to implement it. This is where I'm going to hand them their text. And then when they go home, there is a caretaker guide, as well as a fun gamification that makes this work in the home, that allows them to wrap this around their students. And again, all of these are available in English and in Spanish. We talk about the fact that we have 5 letters. As soon as our students know 5 letters and their sounds, they start to build words. They start to build and decode words. And each of our books comes with a writing page that allows them now to transfer and begin to engage that writing piece as well. This is really powerful, because we're continuing on, right? That multisyllabic work that we just talked about, we have high interest chapter decodable books. So as they continue to progress, as they get into 2nd and 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, now they're getting that multisyllabic instruction. They're getting chapter books. They're getting the text features that help us to understand and connect those language skills that we were talking about earlier. And then they also have a glossary and all of those pieces that make the comprehension and decoding go hand in hand. Of course, we believe in our classrooms, we believe in our schools, so we want to keep those dollars within our schools. And so we make sure that all of our decodables are printed and manufactured in the United States so that we can make sure we keep our dollars here in America. I like that, right? I like that. All of our Spanish books have their own pacing, what's the word I'm trying to say? Their own phonics sequence. Thank you. They have their own phonics sequence, and they're culturally relevant because they're telling stories that are relevant to the Spanish-speaking students that are engaging with these texts. Finally, we have our board books, and these are really, really beautiful. These are for our parents of students age 0 to 3, but they're also really engaging so that while parents are taking in the content, taking in the information, they can also be down on the ground reading to their children, reading through these texts that give beautiful illustrations, beautiful pictures, and teach parents how to engage in that learning and that reading. Each of these books comes with a baby sign so that they're learning the sign of the day that they can be able to communicate and reduce that frustration with I keep wanting to call them students. I do this every single time. They're babies, okay? They're our babies. And of course, if there are any of you who are interested in the work that we do, we are having a take-home pilot that may be something that you might be interested for your school so that they can engage with this work over the winter breaks. If you are interested in something like this, I encourage you to connect with someone on our team so that we can get these books into the hands of children. We love what we do. This is the type of symposium, this is the type of work that is really important to the work that we do so that we can get our researchers having conversations and really building our understanding around the science of reading. All right, so I'm so excited. He's my favorite. I love him too. I love Dr. Tatum. He'll be in Atlanta. If you're in the Atlanta area, we would love for you to join us. We have some questions online that we're going to make sure that we take for.
You know what? We're a little over time, so I think we'll probably end the virtual stream. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today.
Perfect.
It has been a pleasure. I put the website in the chat so you can go and engage and find out about other symposiums or contact somebody on our team. But we really have enjoyed this time today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us virtually. We appreciate you. We're going to take some questions here in the room.